you don't always have to be the best. You don't always have to win. You have to be consistent, and like those big points matter, and that's where the mental side can sort of come into it. But yeah, 100%. I think there's a lot of people in life that spend a lot of time worrying about a lot of stuff that never happens.
Welcome to Unnatural Selection, a show about competition, innovation, and the strategies shaping tomorrow's frontiers. I'm Nick Encina. Each week, we speak with pioneers shaping the future.
In Formula One, everyone is fast. Every driver is elite. Every team employs world-class engineers. Every organization is relentlessly pursuing the next competitive advantage. Yet somehow, certain individuals consistently extract more from the same equipment, adapt faster to changing conditions, and perform under pressure when the margins between winning and losing are measured in thousandths of a second. What creates that difference? Today, we're joined by someone who has spent more than 2 decades studying and developing elite human performance at the highest level of motorsport. Mark Arnall is a world-renowned performance coach who spent 26 years in Formula One, working alongside some of the sport's greatest champions, including Mika Häkkinen, Kimi Räikkönen, David Coulthard, and Sebastian Vettel. Over the course of his career, the drivers he supported achieved 3 Formula One World Championships and more than 200 podium finishes. Today, Mark serves as a leader in human performance for Formula One and is the co-founder of TravelFit, where he applies lessons from elite sport to help people perform, recover, and adapt in demanding environments. In this conversation, we explore what separates exceptional performers from merely excellent ones, why recovery is often overlooked as a source of competitive advantage, and what Formula One can teach us about adaptation when every advantage is temporary. Let's go.
Mark, welcome to Unnatural Selection.
Nice to be here, Nick.
It's great to have you here. I'm really looking forward to this conversation because you and I have spoken before, and obviously the field of Formula One, it pushes human capacity to its limits, and trying to retain that and then overcome that in order to win races and to keep people, these elite trainers, these elite physical athletes at the peak of their shape to be able to respond to all kinds of things is fascinating. How that maps to other areas is also really, really interesting, other fields, other sports, but even other professions. And then the mentality that goes behind some of this very like cutting edge training. But before we get into that, I'd like to start off with a signature question to give you a chance to tell the audience what motivates the work that you do. And so before we get started, can you please let us know what need or impact drives your work, Mark?
I think it's evolved over the years. It was previously working with Formula One drivers to make sure they were in the best shape possible to compete at the highest level. My role shifted now more into looking after the staff of Formula One. And the goal really is to make sure they stay fit and healthy on the road, is probably the easiest way to sum it up.
And so for, I guess for people that are not familiar with TravelFit and what you do with Formula One, can you let us know a little bit about just a quick overview of what you do and how the broader fitness travel industry actually works?
Yeah, sure. So for 26 years of my career, I worked with Formula One drivers. So I was a performance coach, which really covers 4 main pillars. So it's the physical training of the Formula One driver. It's the physiotherapy work that goes alongside that. It's the nutritional component. So looking at their whole nutritional package, hydration, and the travel wellness side. In Formula One, we currently have 24 races, and the role of a performance coach would be to get the driver to all of those races with, number one, as little jet lag as possible, and also with all of that travel, reduce the chance of them getting sick. My transition into Formula One as a company came really because the Formula One drivers I was working with all retired. And I had opportunities to stay in that role, but Stefano Domenicali, who is the CEO of Formula One, he recognized the fact that Formula One has more races on the calendar. So the demands of all staff in Formula One increase, they get greater. And he really wanted to bring in all of the elite level solutions are created for the drivers, but for his traveling staff of 250 people. So it's really doing what I did for a driver, but then bringing it down to cater really for everyone in Formula One.
That's interesting. And so, what are the kind of things that, first of all, you do for the executives of Formula One? How do you take some of the learnings from, like you said, you have these elite drivers that you have to take from country to country, and they have to be prepared at the peak of their shape on race day. And then obviously you take a lot of learnings from that, and then now you distill that down to something that benefits executives. And then the next step beyond that would be, what are the kind of learnings that you take from that regular people might be able to use?
Yeah, I mean, I think I work with actually all people in Formula One. It's the executives, it's all of our traveling staff. And I think whilst in Formula One, we're looking to just optimize everything with the driver. Everyone in Formula One, the teams, the drivers, we all suffer from the same sort of things. We're trying to get around the world. There's obviously big time zone shifts. There's triple header races where you literally go from one race to another. And sometimes we're going from Las Vegas to Qatar. So it's a 15-hour flight. It's straight in from one weekend to another. It's a huge time change. Over the course of maybe 3 races, people get tired. So the immune system gets a little bit run down. It's easier to pick up these bugs and bacterias that we're exposed to. So a big element is sort of staying healthy on the road. In terms of like staying fit on the road, which is another part of my sort of responsibility, and how this plays into your question about sort of how other people can sort of learn from what we do. I think a lot of it is having the mindset of when you're at home, you can get into a proper routine with your nutrition, with your training. You might have a plan of what you're going to do, and there's a goal to that plan. You're aiming for a specific target. I think the mindset when you travel has to be, okay, I'm now in the maintenance phase. What I don't want to do is lose the gains I've made at home. How can I maintain that while I'm traveling? And there are various ways that can be done. I travel with bands around the world, just sort of bands that I can use in a hotel room, which is one option. I can do a full body workout with exercise bands with a door anchor attached to a door. I combine with body weight, combined with core works. I think fundamentally, you want to make sure in a workout you're doing that you doing something that pushes, something that pulls, something for the legs, and something for the core. So I think you just have to have a little bit of a plan of what you're going to do while you're traveling. And maybe for business travelers, look at, okay, when do I have my meetings? What time do I have? Because we're all a little bit time constrained when we're traveling. So it's kind of having a little bit of a plan. How can I fit in what I'm going to do? Am I going to have a rest day? Am I going to focus on just a quick full body workout? Am I going to pack my trainers so I can go for a run outside and actually get to see the local area? Apps are useful, things like Allo Moves, for example, and a host of others you can have on your phone. So you can have your favorite workouts there that you can just set up in the hotel room and sort of bang out a quick 20-minute workout. Sometimes, I mean, as an example of what I've had to do with the Formula One role I'm in now, we're in very early in the mornings. I've just come from the Monaco race, and we were leaving the hotel at 5:30. So I'm not going to get up and do a workout at 4:30 to then go and do a full day at the track. So what I've had to do is, with my appointments at the track where I do all the therapy sessions, at the end of every session, my therapy sessions last maybe 45 minutes, but they're blocked per hour. So at the end of each session, I do 20 push-ups, 20 band pulls with my band attached to the door, and 20 squats. And by the end of the day, I've done 160 to 200 of each. And it feels quite easy because you're just doing that block at every hour. But by the end of the day, all of that work adds up. So it's kind of like, how can you look at your time and schedule in some of these almost like health snacks throughout the day?
Yeah, it sounds like it's being more intentional, right? So, like a lot of times, business travel for me, it's an excuse to be unhealthy. I'm only gone for a few days. I can eat whatever I want. I can skip workouts. But here, where it's more like for people that travel a lot, you have to be far more intentional because those 3 cheat days become 10, become 30, become most of the year before you know it. And so you really have to think about how you carry that physical training and the intentionality and the mentality with you, no matter where you are, because wherever you're sleeping that night, that's practically home if you travel a lot.
Yeah, very much so. And I think a lot of people struggle with buffets. Like when you're eating at home, you don't have a full buffet set up. You make yourself a meal for a specific purpose. I think when people go into the breakfast buffet, they see all of this food, and I think a lot of people tend to overeat from the buffets when they're traveling. And it depends sort of what environment you're in. Certainly in Formula One, there's a buffet at breakfast in the morning, there's a buffet in the hospitality area at lunchtime, and then normally it might be another meal like that in the evening. So you have to kind of be aware that what would I normally be eating at home in comparison to what I'm eating now. A lot of the questions I get from business travelers is focused around this. They tend to find they overeat when they travel. Their body's out of sync, so that they also don't know how to kind of adjust to that. They tend to drink more because they're at social events with their sort of colleagues. So it's kind of what they find over time that the exercise gets a little bit pushed to the back. They're overeating, they're drinking in the evening, and they find just over time they just end up putting on weight. And I think it has to be quite a conscious effort to avoid that from happening because it's a very easy pattern to fit into.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Um, and you mentioned before jet lag. Are there specific things that you recommend for avoiding jet lag more? Or, I've heard things like get back in your eating schedule. So as long as you get back onto that, obviously your sleep schedule and all that kind of stuff. But what are the kind of things that you would have to do, again, to keep Formula One racers from suffering the jet lag, the travel, the fatigue, and all that, and be at their prime on race day?
Yeah, we could probably talk for an hour just about this, but obviously it's been an integral part of my job for
Mhm.
many years, and I think everyone's different. So you have to take all of the rules and then work with those to find what works the best for you. The first thing I always used to do, I always booked Kimi's hotels and flights when I was working with him, and the reason for that is I look after his schedule when he's at home. So before we do any long haul travel, I look at, okay, number one, where we're going to, what plane can we fly on? Airbus A350, Boeing Dreamliner, because of the composite materials those planes are made of, you will just have less jet lag than one of the older planes
Oh,
because
interesting.
you can have slightly higher humidity levels in both of those cabins. And one of the biggest problems with long haul flights is the airline cabin is just like a desert, and it just literally sucks moisture out of you. So dehydration is a huge issue on the flights.
Oh,
So if I
really?
can book, yeah,
Well,
and if I can book a flight on a plane that will be on one of those airlines, I know that I can reduce slightly the negative effects of dehydration. The cabin is also designed with the pressure to fly at a slightly lower altitude, which also is beneficial. Flying direct is useful because it means I can then plan the jet lag schedule a little bit better. Flights that sort of stop somewhere else are a little bit more complex. So that would be the planning phase. And then 3 to 4 days before we travel, I would try and shift our time zone a little bit each day by an hour. So if we're
mm,
flying west, we want to be going to bed later by an hour, getting up later by an hour for the 3 to 4 days before we travel. And a lot of people do this, and I think one of the mistakes people tend to make is they shift their time, but they don't shift their food, and they don't shift their training, they don't shift their meetings. You really have to shift everything to make that work effectively. So if you're used to training at, I think, 9 o'clock in the morning, you need to shift that to 10 o'clock, then 11 o'clock to make sure everything shifts. With Kimi going west, it was actually quite easy because he used to love ice hockey and motocross, watching it in the US. He would stay up till 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning watching these. One of the rooms in his house would be completely blacked out, so there'd be no light coming through, and then he could sleep until 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So we could pretty much get him on sort of US time zone before we even went to the US. And all I had to do was book a flight late in the afternoon to make sure it didn't mess up that sleeping pattern. Traveling east, you just do the opposite. Go to bed an hour earlier, get up an hour earlier for the 3 to 4 days before you travel. Again, shift everything. There are ways to accelerate that, but that's the basics. I think then when you do travel on the day of travel, you just want to make sure you're completely aware of your destination time zone. Because what you need to be doing is eating and sleeping at the right time to where you're going. So, like I say, no one really wears a watch now, everyone has a phone, but just being aware of the destination time is very important so that you're not sleeping at a time when you should be awake and you're not eating breakfast at a time where you should be eating dinner. You're not drinking alcohol, especially if you're flying for business at a time where you shouldn't be, because all of these things are going to put your body out of sync. I know a lot of travelers that come from New York to London, and you should try and eat as early as possible, because as soon as you get on that plane, you want to be sleeping. Because an 8-9 o'clock flight from New York, it's already 2-3 o'clock in the morning in London. And then if you get on the plane and you start eating, you have a wine, and then you go to bed, number one, the digestion process is still happening, which is also compromised on the flight. And then, like I say, by the time you get to the destination, you might have had 3 hours bad sleep and you're completely out of sync with your destination. Hydration is really important, as I touched on before. So a lot of the time, I think if people just focused on one thing, which was hydration, you would feel a lot better at the other end. And
That's
a lot
amazing.
of pilots I know really just focus on that. And then fasting is another way that you can, I don't think anyone thinks plain food is designed for its nutrient content. It's pre-cooked, it's delivered to the plane, it's reheated. Obviously, business class, first class, you get higher quality food. But like I say, our body doesn't digest food quite so well at altitude, and it tends to be overly salted for flavor because our taste buds also don't work quite so well. So sometimes fasting on the flights is advantageous, and I've seen some studies showing that we have a second sort of clock in our body related to food. So I've had quite a lot of success on certain flights fasting, and then just having the first meal as breakfast in my destination. So I think they're fundamentally the basics. I think when you expose yourself to light in combination with when you're sleeping pre-travel and when you get to the destination is also very important. And the other side, which I touched on at the beginning, is just staying healthy while you travel. So I think a lot of people find they get sick when they travel, because as soon as we get to an airport, we're bombarded like with these bugs and bacteria. We're on a small plane, which is condensed with people, but just little things like the security tray. I mean, it's touched by thousands of people every day. So just going through the security, you're touching something that's been touched by thousands of people. So it's a good idea just to have a sort of wipe or gel that you can clean your hands with quite quickly afterwards, or better still, go to a bathroom and wash your hands. When you're actually on the plane itself, there's not really time or any regulation for airlines to sanitize your seat. So if you're sitting in a seat that's been coughed on and sneezed on by a previous passenger, you're sitting in that environment with all of those bugs, whether that's the tray table, the belt buckle, the screen, remote, air vent, all of these sort of things. So what I always used to do, or what I still do, and what I did with the drivers, was just get them to completely clean their own environment to, again, reduce as much as possible the chance of picking up some of those bugs and bacteria from other people. Because like any athletes, it doesn't matter whether it's a Formula One driver or a tennis player. If you get sick while you're traveling, it's going to compromise your performance at the other end. So, like I say, it was really a combination of those two factors with the travel.
That's fascinating. I mean, it's so much there. It sounds like a lot of that is in the preparation and in the flight itself. Are there things that you would do then once you arrive? Obviously, in your preparation, there's a lot of that because you want to arrive, like if you're arriving at 8 a.m. in the morning, you want to be ready to go through the day, not go straight to sleep, and your diet and what you eat, everything leads up to kind of arriving on time where you're going to be. But then are there additional things there? Obviously, maybe continue drinking water because you're probably dehydrated from the flight. Other kind of tricks that people can do? Because it sounds like there's a lot in the preparation. My guess is it probably doesn't solve for 100% of jet lag. So there's probably stuff that you can still do once you arrive, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think this is where you have to have a little look at what do I need to do when I arrive and when do I want to arrive? Are you quite good at following a plan on a plane where you can sleep for a certain period of time knowing you're going to land in the morning and then be awake? Or do you really struggle to fall asleep? Or are you better at staying awake on the plane so that you can then fall asleep in your destination? So personally, I tend to like to arrive at a destination sort of mid to late evening and then go to sleep because most people find it easier to stay up later than they do fall asleep on demand. I think if you're a business traveler, looking at what time your meetings are during the day and trying to place the important meetings at a time when you would be awake at your previous destination, there's more of a chance that you're going to put on a good performance then than at a time that would be when you're asleep in your previous destination, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah,
So
absolutely.
I think there are certain things like that that you can factor in. Certainly with us, like I say, I always tried to create a situation where we arrived in the evening and then could get a decent night's sleep before doing something in the morning. Getting early morning light for a lot of people is very beneficial at the destination, just so trying to get into that, get as much light into your body early on as possible. Eat at the correct time for your destinations. Eat breakfast at the right time, and you can play around with supplementation. I created a supplement with my biochemist for Kimi that worked on hydration and immune system support for the flights. But things like creatine, a lot of people, and there's a lot of information about creatine now. But there was an interesting study just about sleep deprivation and creatine, and using quite big doses, 25 to 30 grams of creatine. And in a sleep deprived person, taking that amount of creatine would offset sleep deprivation. So if you're in a situation where you really haven't had much sleep, you can play around with these sort of things as well. Being active when you're actually in the destination. We sometimes, sort of many years ago when I was working with Mika Häkkinen, we went to Australia and I would set things up in the afternoon, which is normally when you start feeling really sleepy, where we go rowing on the river. There's a big rowing community there. So you book something in water or go for a swim. It's very difficult to fall asleep when you're wet and sort of in the water. So you try and do things to keep you awake at certain times, but certainly the activity side of things is important, getting light at the right time. So with just the general feeling, we always used to run through like a mobility program when we arrived in the destination just to unwind the body. Because again, it doesn't really matter. Obviously, it's worse if you're in economy. It's better for first class passengers, but we're still stiff and achy when we get out of a plane
Yeah.
on a 14, 16-hour flight. So running through a quick mobility program is also useful just to unwind the body. Like I say, I always carry a massage ball around with me, so you can use that on your feet, your hips, your neck, if you need to on the travels. So yeah, they're the sort of things that we would focus on.
What about foods? Um, are there benefits from more protein, less protein, vegetables, carbs? Does that factor in at all in kind of like the whole jet lag and preparation?
I've seen studies in the past that did focus on kind of like high protein, carb, high protein. I think with travelers, you just want to try and make life as easy as possible,
Hmm.
and adding things in that people find complicated normally means they don't do them. I haven't personally specifically followed anything like that for jet lag per se. I just focus on healthy food, so protein is a big part of that. I think staying hydrated is a big part of that. On planes, you don't digest so well, so sometimes having your broccoli, cauliflower, and lots of stuff that requires sort of decent digestion might sort of make people quite airy on the flight and quite bloated. So I'm not saying that there isn't a benefit to certain nutritional strategies, but like I say, probably the biggest one I've used is fasting, so not eating at all
Yeah.
on some of the longer haul flights, and then eating when I get to the destination. And I think it's more like looking at what time you're traveling and then arranging your food. If you know that you've got to fall asleep as soon as you get on a plane, just making sure you've eaten like 3 or 4 hours before that. So it might be before going to the airport, before you check in, you've had your big meal, and then maybe you just have a little snack if you're hungry after check-in, because as soon as you sort of want to go to sleep on the plane, if you've just eaten, it's going to be harder. So that's how I would play around with the food.
Okay. Right. So obviously, like a lot of your experience comes from training Formula One drivers. You spent many years doing that, and these drivers compete in one of the most demanding environments on earth. Right. For those unfamiliar with the sport, what does it actually look like to train someone whose job requires split-second decisions at extreme speeds while enduring intense physical and mental stress?
Um, yeah, it's. I mean, obviously, it's a unique sport, and I think every sport is unique in its own way. I think with Formula One drivers, there's a couple of different things. Number one, you can't make them too big, because if you add a lot of muscle to these guys, muscle weighs 4 times as much as fat, and there's always a weight limit in Formula One cars. You need to work on the conditioning side. So the cardiovascular fitness, they have to have a certain level of conditioning just to do what they're able to do. So there's a base level of cardio. And I think when I was sort of working with the drivers, it was always pretty much 80% cardio in terms of zone 2 work, and then 20%, it might be 75-25, but roughly that sort of amount of zone 2 training, which is the easier form of training. And then the 20 to 25% would be high intensity work. So you're looking just to then make the driver fitter. You've got the muscular conditioning. And I think there are so many complexities working with a Formula One driver because they have left foot braking. So the left leg puts so much pressure on the brake pedal. The right foot is doing this on the accelerator. So you develop this asymmetrical load through the pelvis, which means there's more strength developing in the left side, and the pelvis works slightly differently. So we have to kind of look at that in our training and balance it out just to make sure that doesn't cause lower back issues. Because if you have any sort of asymmetry in that area, lower back problems are quite common in Formula One. The driver sits very close to the ground. They're not in a particularly great position. They're pretty much lying down with a rounded spine. So a lot of the training I did with the driver, sort of on a musculoskeletal side, was more all the muscles they didn't use in the car, which was a lot of muscles in the back, that whole posterior chain, because they work in a very kind of like internally rotated environment with a fairly poor spinal position. So it's kind of like getting the spine to work through extension. It's strengthening the hips, glutes, hamstrings, and actually taking tension off the front. So you kind of put that together. I think the difficult thing with training a Formula One driver is I used to split the season up. So we used to do our block of pre-season training, which was really January, February, and half of March. Because as soon as we start traveling for the first race, there's just with the racing, with the travel, with the media commitments, with the testing, there's just not enough time to train flat out for the whole year. So you did the big block of training at the beginning of the year, which really just kind of like was something you were focused on. So that might be the engineers call me and say, okay, Mark, look, we've got an extra 10 points of downforce on the car this year. We're expecting much higher cornering speeds. There's going to be much more stress on the neck and certain other parts of the body. So my focus would be more on that. And there was one year where a new battery system came in, the KERS system, where it was just heavy, and all the trainers had to get weight off their driver because the driver in the car meant everything was overweight. And if you're just a little bit overweight, you're losing time on the track. So Kimi at the time in Ferrari was heavier than Felipe Massa just naturally. And Kimi, I think, was losing tenth and a half of a second per lap just with the weight.
Wow.
So we had to really try and get the weight off all drivers. And like I say, we were very clearly told that any weight you can get off the driver is going to be beneficial for the car. And I had to say to them, okay, yeah, but there's a line where if I take too much off, it's going to compromise his performance. So there's always a balance. But that first period of the year was always, okay, what are we trying to achieve in our training? And the rest of the year was maintaining that. So maintaining those cardiovascular levels, maintaining the strength levels, And I always used to start here and then taper the training off as the season went on, and then you just ramp up the recovery. Because especially if you're fighting for a championship, with traveling that much, it has a mental load as well that you need to try and manage. Because, like I say, it's not just the physical performance; the mental side of Formula One is quite extreme as well.
Oh yeah. I mean, what fascinates me about this is that everybody pays attention to the driver, but it's a whole team behind any one of these races, right? I mean, there are the engineers, the people that manage the cars, there's the trainers, there's the driver, and what you end up getting is a product, a package that's tons of technology and training and preparation with this human being that's like sliced in the middle in a very awkward position. And so you Formula One, like I said, it's viewed as a technology competition, but ultimately with the human in the cockpit, what have you seen are like the primary determinants of elite performance at that level? Like when you have two drivers that have extraordinary talent, what separates the very best from everybody else? And I ask that because I grew up playing tennis. And so when you look at tennis players, if you can be really good at the college level, but you're still not the same as if you're in the professional level. And even at the professional level, there's a difference between 100 and top 20. But even at top 20, there's a big difference between that and say top 3 or top 1. And at each one of those, there's this like super thin layer that separates that from the rest, but it could also feel like a mile. So on the Formula One, excuse me, on the Formula One side, what separates great from extraordinary?
It's a very good question, and I mean, I think number one, you don't get into Formula One if you're not really at the top of your sport. I mean, all of these guys that drive those cars are super talented, and what separates them is such a finite, minuscule difference. I think some of it is natural talent. I think it's like in any sport, you have these, if you like, freaks of nature that are just unbelievable at something. And I think it depends maybe a little bit on your upbringing. Like, I mean, Kimi Räikkönen, when I worked with him, I think he started driving something when he was 3. Certainly his son, who's now go-karting, started when he was 3. And I think before you can really learn to master your own body in terms of functional movement, your ass is in a car driving in Formula One. So you get to understand what that car's doing underneath you. In a way that if you were to start when you were 7, you will miss out on a lot of what would come naturally. So I think some of it is dependent on how you learn when you're younger, how early you get into these sports. And of course, all of these guys have been go-karting from a very young age. So some of it is that natural talent. Some of it is spatial awareness. So being aware of what's happening around you. While you're driving, if you look at a sort of Formula One start, I mean, how these guys manage to miss each other in the corners sometimes, and obviously sometimes they don't. But some of these guys just have almost like a sixth sense of where they are on a track. So it's something that I think is very, very difficult to train. And you can do some sort of training work around that, but but again, some of that is also a natural talent. The fitness side definitely comes into it. And I think that whole sort of fitness side, hydration side, nutritional side, getting that dialed in and 100% right helps. The mental side is huge. And I think a lot of what separates great athletes from good athletes is that mental ability to absorb everything and not be flustered by it. And I think a lot of top athletes work with sports psychologists and people that are expert in that field if they need to, because it can make a big difference. I remember when I was sort of first in Formula One, sports psychology wasn't a big part of it, and it was almost viewed as a weakness if a driver had to work with a sports psychologist. And I think there was a big transition in this whole mental health, mental wellness some time ago, and I think it transitioned into more like, if he's working with a sports psychologist, maybe that's going to give him an advantage. Maybe I should too. So I think there's a lot of work that a sports psychologist can do to help an athlete. And of course, it's finding the right one that can layer in the right message and work with you on your training. I've never really, I was quite lucky with the drivers I worked with. I mean, I used to do a lot of work with Kimi, and he was actually sort of very like mentally strong. It was, like I say, for him, he approached a race weekend in a certain way, and we had our way of working. But it didn't matter whether he had a crash, whether he won the race. As soon as that race was over, he moved on, and there was no dwelling on the past. It was like, from a team perspective, if something didn't go well, we'd try and learn from that. And I think you learn way more from your failures and things that go wrong than when things go perfectly. But letting go of something you can have no control over is a very healthy thing. And I think a lot of athletes and some drivers kind of like still grate and grind about what happened in the last race. So I think, like I say, I think Roger Federer actually said it really well. He was like, he could play the best shot that's going to be replayed 10 times a week on sort of all of the channels, or he could hit the ball into the net. But he just said a point. He's just a point. It's like, as soon as you finish one point, you've got to move on to the next one. Doesn't matter if the last one was amazing or went into the net. You've got to focus on the next one. And I think Formula One's very similar. It's just per race. So that mental side in Formula One is also sort of huge. I think in terms of the work that I did with that, I found very sort of successful. Visualization was one. So I used to sit Mika in a driving position in a very dark room before qualifying, and he would describe to me his perfect lap. So he'd be there sort of going through the lap, going through the corners. And I would say to him at the end of it, okay, what is the time that you think you can do in qualifying? And he was always within a tenth of a second of what he visualized. And he was an unbelievable qualifier. And so he was able to visualize that lap. And sometimes the times, he said to me, were like so ridiculously quick in comparison to what we'd done in the practice sessions. And like I say, he was always so close, like, and sometimes bang on with what he said he could do. Breath work is really important. So I used to use just a basic form of box breathing, which is quite standard. So you'd breathe in for 4 seconds, hold that breath for 4 seconds, breathe out for 4 seconds, hold that for 4 seconds, set a timer for 5 minutes. And it was amazing the response that would have on the body, lowering heart rate, calming the athlete down. So that was something that I always thought was very useful. Music can amp you up or calm you down depending on how you want to use that. So there are certain things you can play around with. But again, I think a lot of it is just looking at the individual as an individual and thinking, okay, what do they need to perform at their best, and what can I bring in to allow that to happen?
You know, that's the things that you just said are fascinating on so many different levels. For starters, as we spoke in the beginning, one of the things about this podcast, why I started, was because I felt that there would be learnings that you can pull out from some fields and disciplines that are transferable to others. You can learn from how people compete and innovate in some areas that transfer to wildly different areas. And when you were talking about some of the things that differentiate elite drivers, I wouldn't have thought about this, but one of the things that came out in one of my interviews last year, I interviewed the former coach of Serena and Venus Williams, professional tennis coach, Rick Macy. And he said that the thing that differentiates the great tennis players from the very best is their ability to forget the previous point. And you mentioned it right now with Roger Federer, right? It's like your ability to very quickly acknowledge what happened and learn from it, but then you have to put it behind you. Like, it cannot be any sort of weight in the point you're playing right now, which is all you have any control over. You don't control that previous point anymore. The ability to move on. And same thing, I interviewed an elite MMA fighter who said to me the same thing, that it's like, no matter what happens in the previous fight or in the previous round, you've got to put that behind and you just can't quit. You just, every single moment, you have to just keep fighting. And it's amazing that at these elite levels, whether you're MMA, professional tennis, or Formula One, the physicality is obviously a big part, but I don't know how it is in Formula One. In tennis, everybody's in really great shape, right? So at a certain point, that's kind of like it's the bar to entry. You've got to be in elite physical shape. Everybody's got a great forehand, a great backhand. So there's no longer like, well, you've got a great serve and forehand, but you don't have a great backhand. Everybody's got a great game. What differentiates people now is that mental strength at that peak 1% level. And so much of it boils down to just your ability to move on and keep fighting.
Yeah, very much so. I think there's kind of like quite a few different sort of things there. So 100% you're correct. And I think when you look at tennis, I remember reading an article from Roger Federer's coach. And as he was getting older, they changed their philosophy of training a little bit because they knew they couldn't outpower younger players. Younger players come in and they're just younger. They've got more strength, power, explosive ability than an older athlete, even when the older athlete's training as well as they can. So they had to change their training to be more sensible about the way they were playing. Okay, how can we be more tactical about X, Y, and Z? And it was quite an interesting article in the fact that you recognize that you're getting older, so you're not in your sort of mid-20s where you're at your peak. You're now in your sort of early 30s, maybe 35. So how do you change your training to be smarter so that you don't expend quite as much energy? So I thought that was actually quite interesting. I think the other thing that's interesting is kind of like what is considered successful. I mean, I think everyone would say Roger Federer is definitely one of the most successful players in the world. He only won 54% of the points he ever played. So it's kind of like it's only a small margin, but he still was one of the best players that's ever existed. So I think it was quite interesting because you don't always have to be the best. You don't always have to win. You have to be consistent, and like those big points matter, and that's where the mental side can sort of come into it. But yeah, 100%. I think there's a lot of people in life that spend a lot of time worrying about a lot of stuff that never happens, and a lot of stuff that's happened already that they can't do anything about, as opposed to focusing on what can you learn from that. But let me focus on the present and plan for the future to make sure I've learned from what's happened before. And in sport, it just happens a lot quicker. I think every week is a new game or a new match that you have to learn from and adapt to your next event. So, and I think the other big thing, and something you mentioned before about teamwork, I think Formula One's quite interesting because you've got one driver driving the car, but you've also got 15, 20 guys in the pit stop. So you can do all of the work to make that driver as good as possible. If you're not looking after the mechanics that are in that pit stop. And I mean, a good pit stop is 1.8 seconds to get the car in the air, take 4 tires off, put 4 tires back on and go. So they aim for 2 seconds, 2 to 2.2 just for consistency, but like 1.8 is probably the gold standard. But if you've got a mechanic that makes a mistake for 1.5 seconds, that could cost you 3 places in Formula One. So it's kind of, it's an individual sport for the driver, but that whole team around in a pit stop, and depending on the race, they might do 2 pit stops, they might do 5 or 6 per car if it's really, really chaotic. With wet weather stuff, tires changing all the time. So those mechanics also have to be very on the ball. So it's there's lots of things that can go wrong, and there's obviously there's a focus on making sure the pit crew are in good shape as well, and can focus on their jobs. So it's very much a team sport from that point of view. And again, from a driver perspective, when we've got a season, I sit down with the driver and say, okay, look, we've got 20, 22, 24 races. We know 4 are going to be a disaster. You might get taken out by someone else. You might crash. The pit wall might make the wrong strategy call in difficult conditions, so that when those things do go wrong, they don't start panicking. They just tick it off as, yeah, well, that's one of those races that was going to be a disaster, because it's very, very unlikely you're going to have a perfect season and everything's going to go right. So when you manage those expectations initially, and sometimes you might think, okay, we've got a car that's super quick in a straight line, but pretty bad around corners. So you focus on your Monza or your Azerbaijan race that's got super long straights, so you can optimize the performance there. And then if you've got a car that's great round corners, then you look at Singapore and Monaco and some of these sort of tighter sort of tracks where you can then try and extract as much as you can from the car there. So you try and be as strategic as possible with your planning throughout the season.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah, it's like you said, all the tracks are different. The climates, the environments are different. The teams are different, and in so many different variables, from the pit crew to the driver to the technology to the elements. I'm sure there's an element of luck in all of this as well. When you have so many
Sure.
variables floating around,
Yeah.
it's amazing that with so much variability, you still end up getting consistent wins. Sometimes teams and drivers do really well. They just
Yeah.
edging past the competition by, a millionth of a second or something like that, but they're still consistently winning, right? So it's like it's amazing
Yeah.
to see that.
Yeah, I think in Formula One, it's probably one of the biggest difference between Formula One and some other sports. Like in tennis, your racket, no one's got the best racket and no other racket's going to come close. In Formula One, the car does make a difference. And of course, the difference between the fastest car on the grid and the slowest is not much. But if you are lucky as a driver to have a car that's one of the quickest on the grid, I've been lucky to work with drivers probably out of the 26 years. For 6, 7 of those years, we had a very quick car. And sometimes it was pretty much the same speed as Ferrari when I was in McLaren. Sometimes in Ferrari, it was the same as something else. So it's really then down to the driver who's going to win from one race to the other. Sometimes one team just has a car that's half a second quicker than everyone else. So you just hope as a driver you're going to be in that car, and then the person you have to beat is your teammate, which creates its own kind of sort of battles. But the car that you're in does make a difference. So I think, like I say, it's one of the differences between Formula One and some other sports. But like I say, it doesn't take away from the fact that it's you still have to perform at that highest level in that car.
Yeah, and yeah, obviously you were in Formula One for a long time, and at these elite levels, obviously with such a long history being there, I'm sure there were learnings and experiences that you came across that probably were surprising even to you, right? What are the kind of things, either misconceptions that people have about recovery, fitness, performance at those levels, or even surprising things that you may have learned or seen in some of the best drivers out there when it came to commitment or their perseverance? Or do you remember any kind of situations where you were like genuinely surprised, you felt like you unlocked something that you hadn't anticipated beforehand?
It's a good question. I mean, I think you try and optimize everything as much as possible. I think from a recovery point of view, recovery is huge. Sleep is huge. In Kimi's house, we had cryo chamber, we had saunas, infrared saunas, we had all of the different modalities you could think of to try and accelerate recovery as quickly as possible. So I think recovery is probably a very underrated part of what people think about. A lot of people think from a training perspective, you just have to train. Really, it's about recovery and sleep. So you try and optimize those things. I think certainly when I was working with Kimi in McLaren, he had this ability just to drag more out of the car than most people thought the car was capable of. So in 2004, I think our car was particularly bad. He still managed to win in Spa, and it's like a proper driver's track, and he just managed to drag so much more performance out of it than that car should have been able to deliver. So I think sometimes you see some of these drives from certain drivers. Like I've worked obviously with 3 drivers that were all world champions, and that they had this ability sometimes just to drag more out of the car than it should have really been able to deliver. And you don't quite know where that comes from. I mean, I think what gets them going like that, Kimi was 17th on the grid in Japan, won the race by making overtake on the last lap. But he wound his way through the field to be in that position. Whereas, like I say, in other years, he just managed to drag a car that should have maybe 10th and won the race out with it. And everyone in the garage just looks at each other going, how did you do that? And I think there's a few drivers. Max Verstappen at the moment is one of them that I think he's able to extract more from the car than that car should really be able to deliver. And I think that's the difference really between an exceptional driver and a very good driver. It's that ability to be able to extract the maximum from the equipment they have that makes everyone think, how did he do that?
Yeah, it's like a sixth sense. It's like something
Mm.
you just can't really explain. Hey, did you see, and obviously you were in Formula One for a long time training drivers, how did the field evolve during your tenure? As from when you first walked in to when you exited training drivers, were there big shifts in clearly technology, but on the drivers and the mentality and the training, what were some of the major kind of evolutionary shifts that you saw in the field while you were there?
I think within the health and fitness world, everything evolves. And I think it's one of the reasons I love that industry is because we constantly learn more. I learn more still now about the human body. And I think it's fascinating that we always have that ability to learn more. I think tracking certain things is easier now with technology than we ever had before. I think recovery is easier now because number one, we understand more about it, but we have more options to use. So I think if I look back to 1997, when I started, we didn't have a lot of what we have now available to us. So I think that has definitely changed. The cars have definitely evolved. They've gotten quicker. I mean, the technology behind them is mind blowing. And I don't think any other industry that I've ever witnessed moves as fast as Formula One. I mean, it is just the pace of development is insane. And even the way the sport develops is incredible. So I think the technological side behind the cars has always improved. Tires improve, fuel improves, aerodynamics improve, the car goes faster. All of those things definitely change from a, like I say, human performance point of view, understanding more about the human body, like beginning of every year, we always used to do very detailed blood, urine, stool analysis to get a full like sort of overview of what's happening inside the driver's body. And then I worked with a very good biochemist that would kind of extrapolate all of that data, would look at anything that was out of range, would firstly try and correct all of that with real food because the body absorbs and digests real food better than it does anything else. And then we'd retest. And if things were still out of range, then we'd use very targeted supplementation. And then, like I say, working with a biochemist and a driver that had money, I could get him to create all of these different, very, very high end supplements that focused on sleep, hydration, immune system support, recovery from driving and training, all of these different things. So, like I said, that wasn't really available in 1997 when I started. It's something that sort of we developed and that came in later. So you're always trying to learn and sort of try and incorporate all of these new technological advances to try and improve the package you're offering for the driver. And I think from my point of view, I think it's always good to understand and realize what your area of expertise are. So my expertise on the training side, the sort of physio side. I understand a lot about nutrition because I've worked with great nutritionists and biochemists, but that's not my sort of studied area. So I just try and bring in the best nutritionists, the best biochemists I can find that can do all of this for me that I can work with and then incorporate into the driver's program. Kimi had a very bad sort of crash in his first year in 2001 in Sauber. He hit a wall at 200 miles an hour. Wow. And had two degenerative discs in his lower back that we constantly had to manage. And every now and then it would flare up. I mean, like out of an 8-year period, maybe twice, where, okay, this is now something that I can't solve. So we had a guy in University of Strasbourg Hospital that could do a very non-invasive kind of work on the spine. And like 10 days later, Kimi was driving in a Formula One car. So I tried to surround myself with as many sort of people that were super specialists in certain areas so that if Kimi needed something, I could go to those experts as opposed to try and do it myself, which, like I say, if there's someone better to do that job, you bring them into the mix.
Mm-hmm.
So I tried to create a network around me that I could tap into of sort of super high end expertise. And like we had a wrist guy in Geneva, and he was just a wrist specialist. And for Formula One drivers, if you're holding a Formula One steering wheel and you hit a wall at 150 kilometers an hour and you don't remember to let go of the wheel, that wheel can spin very quickly. And of course, that can damage the wrists. So a lot of drivers learn the hard way, normally before they get into Formula One. But sometimes things happen so quickly, they forget to let go. So having a wrist specialist is quite useful at times. But he was like, don't give me a knee. I don't know about knees. And the guy's an orthopedic surgeon, but he just specializes on the wrist. So like I say, it was fascinating for me because I got to learn from these sort of specialists in their field about a wrist, a knee, a spine. But I could tap into their expertise if I needed to.
Well, and you hear as you're talking, you're tweaking at such fine grain levels. Like you said, there are specialists for knees and for wrists and for different joints and mechanics and everything. Have you found that there's a point at which the pursuit for optimization starts becoming counterproductive? Is there a line, or have we just not hit that yet?
I think you can go overboard on some of these things, and I think again it's kind of recognizing who you're working with and what they need. Like I worked with just one person, okay, 3 different people, but just one person at a time, for 26 years. So it's kind of like, hey, what does this person need? What can I provide to them that's going to optimize their performance? And it got to the point with Kimi where I didn't think I could do any more to optimize it than where we actually were. So so like you tweak things and you fine tune things. You try and take as much stress away from the athlete you're working with as possible. So if we're going to a hotel, these guys, as soon as they walk into an airport, a hotel, fans kind of run to them. They want autographs. When you're just trying to focus and concentrate on sleep, checking into a hotel, I used to contact the hotel in advance and say, okay, look, we're arriving at this time. Can we come round the back? Can you check Kimi into the room? I'll bring his passport with mine to the front desk and do the sort of check-in if we need to. But if you can check him in the room, that would be great. So you try and find a way into the hotel that just avoids the stress of you've just got off a 15-hour flight. You've got to the hotel. Like I say, you don't want to say no to fans to sign stuff. But it also adds stress to their life. So like how could I kind of manage the situation to try and take away a lot of that stress? So again, it's the fine tuning stuff. But yeah, and other people might be different. There are other athletes that they might sort of have other needs, and you might need to optimize different things. But certainly from my experience, I think I took it as far as I could in terms of what I thought I could do. Maybe I missed a few things, you never know. But like I say, I certainly tried to sort of see what limits I could take it to. I don't think we ever got to the point where it was too much supplementation side. It was kind of like Kimi was very good. It's just like, you tell me what to drink and I'll drink it. You tell me what to take and the time I should take it, I'll take it. So he just let me kind of manage everything and sort of get on with all of that. So he was very easy to work with in that respect. But again, like I say, everyone's different. So I think it's just really, if you're working with an athlete or a business executive, you have to understand their needs and tailor what you offer to them.
Yeah. It's fascinating. I really have to make it to one of these races at some point. But Mark, this has been extraordinary. I think we're finishing off with a signature question. You've seen so much over 30 years span or so in your career in this field, working, like you said, with 3 elite drivers. You've been a part of winning teams. You've been to all the races. You've seen some extraordinary things. If you could reflect for a moment, just fast forward into the future at a point where you're ready to reflect back into your entire body of work, both things that you've done to date and things that you're still working on. It's really totally up to you on what scope you look at this. What do you think a best case scenario would look like, where you can kind of reflect back and think about what accomplishment or changes that you would have made to the field or to drivers or anything specific would bring you the greatest level of pride and fulfillment over what you would have accomplished?
I think the obvious one, and it's going to sound very obvious, but I've been lucky to work with drivers and teams that have won world championships, and it's been amazing to be part of that journey. With Mika Häkkinen, we won 2 world championships together. With Kimi, we won 1. I worked with Sebastian, but he'd already won his world championships then. So I think looking back, it's always amazing to go through that process and actually work with a driver that's achieved their lifetime ambition. And also learning what happens when things don't go right, I think is a really valuable lesson because, as I said before, I think we learn so much more from failure than we do from success. So I think they're the obvious ones. I think going forward, because my role's changed now, and I work with the staff in Formula One, I think what I could do with a driver, you're looking for that last 1% of optimization because you've done everything else as much as you can with some of the people like our camera guys or whoever it may be in the team. The difference I can make is 30 or 40%. So going through the basics with them, and it's been very rewarding helping them with issues that they've had that to me seem super obvious in the basics that they don't know about. So I think fundamentally looking forward, I'll be really happy to look back and think I made their life traveling healthier, more comfortable, less problems, created an awareness for them how they could train on the road, how they can sort of look at their nutrition, how they can look at their hydration, giving them tools that they can use to work on themselves from a self-care point of view, like the massage balls and great mobility programs for them. So I think in the future, if someone sort of was to sort of say something that, oh yeah, Mark's great because he taught me all of this stuff and it made my traveling life that much easier, I think I'd be very happy.
Well, sounds great. I've learned so much from preparation to dehydration to the mentality of Formula One. This has been really fascinating to hear from somebody that's been in the field for such a long time. Mark, I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much for being on Natural Selection.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Look forward to seeing you again, Nick.
That was Mark Arnall. And now, Unnatural Signals.
The following signals emerged from our conversation with Mark. Number 1, optimize the system, not the hero. Formula One looks like an individual competition because one driver sits in the cockpit. In reality, performance emerges from an entire system: driver, engineers, mechanics, nutrition, recovery, technology, strategy, and environment. Mark's pit stop example makes this especially clear. A driver can be extraordinary, but one mechanic making a mistake can erase the advantage. So the cross-industry signal is, the best organizations don't merely optimize their stars, they engineer the entire ecosystem around them. Number 2, the edge comes from adaptation. The competitive advantage doesn't remain fixed. Cars evolve, tires evolve, training evolves, recovery evolves, the competition evolves. Mark's observation that F1 may be the fastest moving industry he's witnessed is especially revealing. The cross-industry signal is, competitive advantage is not something you possess, it is something you continuously regenerate. Number 3, learn, then let go. One of the strongest ideas in the entire episode, elite performers extract the lesson from failure but don't carry the failure forward. Mark describes Kimi's ability to move immediately beyond a crash or a bad race and connects it to Federer's next point mentality. The cross-industry signal is, organizations need institutional memory without institutional baggage. Learn from what happened, then make the next decision from the present. And number 4, optimization has its limits. The instinct is always to optimize more, but Mark eventually reached a point where he felt he couldn't optimize Kimi any further, and recognized that different people require different interventions. The cross-industry signal is, more optimization isn't always more adaptation. At some point, complexity becomes more friction. The best systems know what not to optimize. Thank you, and see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Unnatural Selection. If you enjoyed the episode, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone shaping the future. Explore more at unnaturalselection.net and connect with us on LinkedIn and Facebook. Until next time, keep evolving.